The dynamics that caused the rise of the SaaS industry to begin with are absolutely alive and well today. And so that methodology of just jacking prices up and up and up without showing value that goes up and up and up, that is at its breaking point. The CEOs who are saying, gosh, we got our renewal for SaaS application and it is 6x what we were paying before. And you can't do that. You get to a point where the customer says, I have alternatives. I could try to build it myself. 37% of the software companies that they were talking with were planning on changing their pricing next year because of AI, and another 40% were totally unsure. So like 70% of companies don't have the monetization model in place today. Data from our system shows the sweet spot is somewhere between 1 to 25% of overall revenues should be associated with usage in a hybrid model. If you get less or more than that, you start to see growth decrease.
Welcome to Go-to-Market Science. In this podcast, we share tangible, actionable playbooks from the trenches, working as go-to-market strategy and RevOps consultants for our clients here at Union Square Consulting, and candid conversations with revenue leaders in the market that have been there. Now let's get into it.
Welcome back to Go-to-Market Science. I'm your host, Rachel Buchert, and with me today is Amy Konary, the SVP of Marketing at Zuora, which is a leading subscription management platform, as well as the founder and chair of the Subscribed Institute, Zuora's think tank. Today, we're going to be talking about building recurring revenue that actually lasts and the shift from extractive to symbiotic business models in go-to-market. Thank you so much, Amy, for joining us.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to be here. Look forward to it.
Yeah. So, Amy, you've had a really unique career arc. You spent nearly 2 decades at one of the top industry analysts, as one of the top industry analysts at IDC. Then you made the jump to Zuora, where you've led marketing, customer success, strategy, and you built the Subscribed Institute from the ground up. Would you be able to give us a quick version of that journey and what's driven you through it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always been interested in technology, and my first job in the software industry was before the SaaS industry. So it was a while ago. And one of the things that struck me at that time was the lack of customer centricity in the software industry years ago. The old model, perpetual software license model, you sold a whole bunch of software. It behooved you to sell as much as you possibly could up front. The software was shipped to the customer as physical media. The customer hired consultants, systems integrators to install it. You somewhat wiped your hands of that customer, although typically they were contractually obligated to pay you maintenance forever as long as they use the software. And it was really up to the customer to get value out of it. The vendor, technology provider recognized all of the revenue up front. Maintenance was contractually obligated. So it was just like a guaranteed recurring revenue stream, which was contractually set at the percentage of that license fee. And it was quite a great business model for the technology industry. There's really no incentive from a economic perspective for that model to change, but it was really terrible for customers. During the time of my first software company, I saw companies go out of business, not our customers necessarily, but other companies go out of business trying to install ERP systems, companies going bankrupt, lawsuits. It was really quite disillusioning. And so I became an industry analyst really to find the customer in all of this. I thought, look, there's a real benefit to technology, but the way that it was sold, really the go-to-market at that time was completely broken. And when I became an industry analyst, this was before SaaS, and it was just starting to develop. And because I was the new analyst, they kind of gave me the assignment to go figure out what these people were doing in strip malls and apartments where they were putting software in the cloud, which was called a variety of things then. We hadn't hinged on cloud yet, and providing access via a recurring payment. And it really shifted the risk dynamics and also created a relationship where both the provider of the technology and the customer were creating value together. Because if the customer wasn't seeing value, they weren't going to adopt more. They weren't going to continue to pay. And to me, that felt like a lot better model. And so I was the industry analyst, created the SaaS category, named it, defined it. And for many years, any software company that was building a SaaS business throughout the very early years, up into 2017 or so, was likely a customer of mine. And where I had to do a lot of the work and advisory work was on the go-to-market itself, because as I said, the previous economics go-to-market really favored the vendor, and most companies really didn't want to change that. So you had to go through a really difficult shift. People called it swallowing the fish. If you were a company like Oracle or SAP, anyone who had been around before that shift. And some companies didn't make it. And of course, we had a whole host of companies like Salesforce and the company that I work for, Zora, that were founded during that time to try to serve that new and meet that new market need. So I found that incredibly fascinating. When it was time to go back to the operator side, Zora was a natural fit for me because I knew how difficult and sort of ongoing the challenge of really nailing the go-to-market around recurring revenues was. And it's really because that shift in dynamic from extractive, I'm going to extract as much money as I possibly can up front from you, to more of a symbiotic relationship, or at least that was the idea of SaaS in the very beginning. And I think we've drifted away from that a bit over the years. I think the SaaS industry as it exists today looks pretty similar to how the software industry looked 20 years or so ago when I first started paying attention. And so I'm really looking forward to this next phase. It certainly feels like we're entering this next phase of technology being an opportunity for us to really do a reset and to allow us to create relationships between customers and providers that can truly be valuable for both sides. And I think that's really the only way forward. So I'm excited about helping to drive that.
That's awesome. And did you, correct me if I'm wrong, did you coin the term SaaS, or you're one of the first people?
I did, because there was no market at the time. And because my responsibility was to size and forecast the market, I had to give it a name. And what was interesting at the time is I was an analyst in our software P&L, and there was an analyst in the services P&L that wanted to cover it as well. And we kind of debated whether it was software as a service or services as software. And whoever decided which word went first would end up getting to cover it. And I really wanted to cover it. So I very much campaigned that what the customer buying was ones and zeros. They were buying software functionality first and foremost. And so that's why it had to be called software as a service, but it almost became services as software. But it did not. And so that very first market sizing, it was a complete finger in the air guess, because nobody would tell me how much money they were making. But I guessed that it was about a $40 million worldwide market size. I can remember doing that very well, putting it in the Excel spreadsheet and forecasting that out 5 years. And of course, now the market itself is way more than $40 million worldwide. But back in the day with that first sizing, these were all private companies. The subscriptions were very inexpensive. Salesforce was $5.99 per user per month back then. So getting to 40 million when you were really just pricing to get adoption, which is what these companies were doing early in the day, was really tough. And of course, now we know that that's not the case anymore as far as the market size and the pricing.
Damn, so you've really seen it all from the very beginning. That's amazing. So what, through all of that, what do you think is driving this push, this evolution from extraction to symbiotic business models?
Yeah, so I'm going to think about it very practically, and then I'm going to think about it very woo-woo-y. So from a very practical perspective, when I'm talking to a CRO, I think about the metaphor of finding a vein of gold, right? And you tap into a certain vein, and there's a point in time where that vein is no longer available to you. And that was the perpetual license model. And that's why the subscription model, as it became in the last 20 years or so, was a source of growth for companies, because the number of companies that wanted to pay for perpetual license, install software on-prem, got smaller and smaller over the years. And the companies that wanted to access functionality over the cloud, that got better and better over time, that made a lot more sense to companies. So there was a real economic reason for companies to start to shift to selling subscriptions and SaaS. Now what we're seeing, of course, is that opportunity becoming tapped out. And I'm seeing it in the conversations that I have with the buyers every day, the CFOs, the CEOs who are saying, gosh, we got our renewal for, SaaS application, and it is 6x what we were paying before. And you can't do that like that. You get to a point where the customer says, I have alternatives. I could try to build it myself. I could go with lower cost provider for good enough functionality. I mean, the dynamics that caused the rise of the SaaS industry to begin with are absolutely alive and well today, even more so with the bar for what it takes to build an application that you'd use inside an enterprise or a small business has gotten much lower. And so that methodology of just jacking prices up and up and up without showing value that goes up and up and up, that is at its breaking point. Now, the argument is, well, because of AI, we're putting new agentic features in our product, but we don't see customers yet feeling like they're seeing enough value out of those agentic features. And certainly I know that from the people that I'm talking with, the adoption of those features is in early days. And so it's really difficult to know what the value might be. It's very hard to price for that. And of course, we know the costs are unpredictable as well. So shifting to a model, you hear it all of the time, shifting to a model that's a bit more of a hybrid model where you have some sort of a platform fee in addition to a usage or an outcome or a performance fee is what we hear companies talking about. By the way, usage and outcome has always been associated with recurring revenue models, including SaaS. Somewhere along the way, SaaS got equated with per seat pricing as if that's the only way to monetize it. It isn't, but I'm not going to die on that hill. If you want to say, look, SaaS was per seat, now we're moving into usage and outcomes, and that equals AI, fine. I don't really care what you call it. But the reality is customers are going to want a balance of predictability and a balance of some sort of alignment between the price that I'm paying and the value that I'm getting out of the software. And that's where the extractive versus symbiosis balance is happening, where providers cannot simply put features out and assume customers are going to get value. They're going to adopt them just because they're there, and they're going to be happy to pay 6x for your tool because of them, which was an assumption that companies were making 6 to 12 months ago. I think they're backpedaling on that a bit more. And they are, at least companies I'm talking to, moving to more of a co-creation of value approach, which I think is much more sustainable from a long-term perspective.
Okay, so companies that kind of find themselves in that model right now, and maybe, CROs or revenue listeners listening to this who are realizing that they might actually be in that kind of extractive model, what should they be looking for, and how should they be thinking, going into the future, ways to pull out of that and be more symbiotic? What are kind of the first steps?
Yeah, I think, I mean, and this is where I'm going to get woo-woo. So that was more the economic side. Here's the woo-woo side. When you're selling a recurring revenue product, you're selling, at the end of the day, a relationship. That's why you probably have a team called customer success. We didn't have customer success before all of this. There was support and you had documentation, you still have those things. But success has always really been focused on helping the customer get to value. And if you think about any relationship that you might have in your personal or professional life, there are a couple of fundamentals that make for a good relationship. Number one is communication. And when it talks to, what should CROs or CEOs do? Conversations with your customers are so, so important. What they need, how they feel about AI, how they feel about adopting AI within that. And again, not rocket science, woo woo, but somehow we've kind of moved away from that because everybody's like, we got to go really fast. And so they're building these things without that necessary communication channel. Who are your top customers? Bring them into a cab. Have a conversation about what you're thinking. Have them tell you what they're thinking. Talk about what it will take for them to trust what you're bringing to market, because there's a whole trust architecture that comes into play when you're talking about AI. And just having those conversations is so, so important. And I'm finding companies are wasting more money by trying to go fast and building things without having clear and open communications with their customers, because they're putting them out there and the customers are saying, don't turn them on, turn them off. I want to be opted out of this because I have a policy and I can't adopt it, or I'm not sure whether or not what I'm doing is going to train a model for a competitor, or you haven't made it clear to me how the cost of this might change over time. So making sure you're having that clear communication, and even if it's going to take you a little bit of time, is going to save you time and money down the road. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I alluded to trust, and trust is so key when it comes to any relationship. And, we talked about trust in the early days of SaaS. I think people don't realize or remember that as much because it's sort of a foregone conclusion. But there was a time when people really had a hard time getting their heads wrapped around the fact that my software and data is going to sit outside of my company. And companies like Salesforce and others had to do a lot of work to prove why that was more trustworthy, more secure, and just a better reliability and availability model relative to things that you could control within your own business, and that the benefits of being able to access software that was sitting in a cloud environment outweighed any potential risks of the fact that your customer data and personally identifiable information was going to not be sitting within your own company walls. That was a huge hurdle. Somehow we don't have as many of those conversations before and now as we did before. And if you think back to when it comes to AI, what are some of the trust pillars that you're going to need to be able to share with your customers to help them feel really comfortable about adopting this new technology, which is, of course, a precursor to value? The integrity of the intelligence. How do you know that what you are as a customer interacting with is not going to be filled with copyrighted information? It's going to be accurate. It's not going to be misleading. Those are things that people are worried about. And that's one of the reasons why you see companies saying, look, I'm not going to adopt this at this time, we're still figuring it out. Clarity on data contribution. Am I training a model by using it that my customers are going to get, my competitors rather, will be getting benefit out of? And how do I opt out of that? What kind of compliance consent do I need to give? And can I revoke it at any time? Economic clarity. How is this pricing going to evolve over time? And is there pricing dignity? Meaning, am I going to have some control over how this unfolds over time? Or if there's a usage model, how do I see, is there visibility into what that usage looks like? Do I have the opportunity to pause and resume? And from a provider perspective, communication and trust are so important to any relationship. And it's the only way to create a sustainable relationship that's not extractive and that actually can get you the value that you're hoping to see by all of this incredible innovation. So anyway, that was a lot of soapboxy things, but these are a lot of the conversations that I'm having with companies as they're kind of tripping over themselves to try to figure out, how do I go fast? How do I build a competitive moat? How do I make it clear that I have a strategy? And you could talk about all of those things and have the strategy, but if you are not talking to your customers and you're just doing messaging out there in the world without having those meaningful conversations, you're going to end up having to pull back and retrench more times than you're going to be able to move forward.
Yeah, I always hear the term move fast and break stuff. Like people want to move quickly, ship, and then see what works and what doesn't and iterate based off of that. But you're saying like this can just quickly lead companies down like the swirl of the drain?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly depends on what you are, but Zora is a financial system of record. If we break shit for our customers, people go to jail. Like, okay. And there are other systems too. Like if their shit breaks, planes crash. Like depending on what you do, you have different levels of ability to do some of that, and I think different degrees of it. I mean, I love the idea of rolling up sleeves and experimenting, but you've got to do that within a safe context, and you can't assume. Sort of what I'm talking about is you can't assume what you're building is automatically going to translate into value for a customer just because you think it's a super cool idea. And if you do that independent of having those customer conversations, you don't have to talk ad nauseum. You can be building in parallel, but you really ought to have some really meaningful checkpoints with customers, because otherwise you could have a surprise. And I'm seeing that play out today. It's costing a lot of enterprise software companies a lot of money because they don't have people adopting the AI features that they've got out there. So they've incredibly high paid resources out in the field trying to convince customers to use AI tools that they don't want to use because they don't understand why they need them. So that is a problem I'm seeing in a lot of places today.
A lot of trying to shove a square peg in a round hole. It's like,
yeah. And hey,
use
look,
it.
Maybe that's the process. Maybe that's the process to getting to this is what we actually want to see. And some companies have the capacity to throw money at the problem. And I'm not worried about these particular companies, going belly up anytime soon. But if you're a small to mid-size company, I'm saying anywhere, under 30 million ARR, you don't have too many at-bats at this thing. And certainly an epic failure when if you have financial software or software within operations that costs customers real tangible money or puts them in real risk if it breaks or hallucinates, you just have to be careful, as always.
So what's the growth play that you would suggest as an alternative to, just trying to get on the bandwagon of creating all these AI agentic features and hoping that people like them enough to renew or expand into bigger tiered subscriptions?
Yeah, I think experimentation is and can be a really great way of doing this. Co-creation of features with your customers. So I'm seeing companies do really fun things where they're bringing customers on site, working with engineers, and just kind of getting in their systems and what it would be like. What would it be like if you could do things this way or that way? Think of hackathons where you usually get teams of engineers together. Can you bring customers on site and kind of work in parallel with them for a day? Or, I think that conversation, how do you make that conversation happen and then go off and do the sprint, is something that we're seeing that's working really well. Having champions out there in the industry, people who are excited about what you're doing and who will evangelize that for you within your customer base, also something that we're seeing happening and being really exciting. I think, again, I operate in the field of enterprise software, and you have different degrees of levels of wanting to adopt new innovation. Some of the companies that I'm working with that are in the industrial space or in the agricultural space, their customers are still a bit farther behind, maybe someone who's in a MarTech or a sales tech space. So there's no one size fits all approach. But I would say, you can build things really quickly. You can test things really quickly. You can build and do context mapping really quickly. If you have an enterprise system that's a vertical system or one that has a lot of data in a space that doesn't exist in a lot of different areas, you can do a lot of predictive and you make your existing apps just so much better for customers. You can increase or rather decrease implementation times. So I would say where you can allow your a thousand flowers bloom to a degree, at some point in time, you've got to pull back and say, okay, well, which one of these are really going to create value for our customers? Maybe it's time to value because it'll shorten implementation times. Maybe it allows them to interact with their data in new ways. Maybe it allows them to be more efficient. Maybe it allows them to bring together data sets that have never been brought together before. I'm incredibly excited about what the systems can do. But what gives me pause and what worries me is that it is not clear yet how customers are willing to pay for all of these great things that the systems can do. Are they willing to pay more for the software? That's totally not clear. In fact, when we have done survey work, we find a very low percentage of customers saying, I'm just going to write a bigger check for this software if it has AI features. We also know from the vendor side, I was looking at a study from a company called Iconic recently, where 37% of the software companies that they were talking with were planning on changing their pricing within the next year because of AI, and another 40% were totally unsure. So 70% of companies don't have the monetization model in place today, and or they definitely are going to change it. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty right now for revenue leaders and go-to-market leaders about what does this do as far as our ARR? What does this do as far as our CAC? Are we going to be spending a lot of time evangelizing and getting people adopt these things, or are they just going to take off? So we're in an experimentation phase. You want to have things for people to experiment with. That's incredibly important. But my point around making sure you're doing that with customers is so important, because the faster you can get people to value, the faster you're going to be in a position to start to think about how can these things be monetized in the right way.
And have you been seeing a lot of data out there of, you know, companies trying to push these features, having a lot more churn or issues maintaining renewals?
So it depends. I think historically, you're going to have a stickier renewal model if you have obviously a way of demonstrating value back to the customer, and if you have a system that's mission critical and their whole source of things. What I find is that a usage model, independent of a platform fee, is typically a riskier model from a retention perspective. Think of it like freemium in a way, but it's like you pay a little bit because people tend to pay usage for things they might be experimenting with. If they achieve a amount of usage, then maybe they want to convert into more of a predictable platform fee. So if there's a way where you can drive customers into a platform fee plus some usage and help them find usage, that tends to be a little bit more of a predictable model in terms of a churn perspective. I am seeing a lot of difficulty with retention conversations because of the uncertainty around AI. We're seeing, and I talk to companies all the time about this. This is a core tenet of SaaS, but when you can allow customers to downsell, that's obviously better than a cancellation. So having that downsell play and opportunity, something to keep that relationship. The other thing that we're seeing, being able to save churns today, is a pause and resume type of a situation. If you're able to allow customer, rather than flat out canceling the relationship right now, let's put a pause on it. Maybe you need to, wait 3 to 4 months, and then we can, re-engage or turn things back on. Maybe you've got a leadership change that's happening, or that whole team that was using it is gone and you're rehiring a new team. Okay, let's put a pause. We know you're not going to give value until you bring those new people in. And that is something we did a study on that in the Subscribed Institute. And we found that on average, you can save somewhere between 1 and 2 out of 6 churns by just allowing people to pause the relationship. So there are some tactics that you can use in this time of uncertainty to kind of preserve the relationship, all else, which is what we recommend. So it's either a hybrid pricing model, the ability to downsell, or the ability to even pause the relationship as being things that we're seeing companies try. I'd say the final thing that we're seeing a move to would be more multi-year contracts. So if you're typically an annual contract, thinking of, can we do a 3-year relationship with this customer? That is also something we're actually seeing customers being interested and more interested in some of these multi-year arrangements to lock in some predictability for them. Obviously, they expect there's a lot of innovation and change that's going to happen. And from a customer perspective, that protects them a little bit from a 6x price increase next year because of whatever AI innovation, and gives them predictability into the future. And that also benefits the provider, because obviously it gives them some more predictability and reliability into their customer relationships over time, rather than having those year-to-year relationships.
I imagine this to be like super frustrating for revenue leaders, SaaS business owners who are trying to, keep up with the times, keep up with the technology, and implement these AI changes. Because everyone from all angles are hearing like, oh, you need AI in your product, or else you're going to fall behind. And your competitors are going to have it, and you won't. And then to do that and turn around and see that the public doesn't actually really care about it that much or want it that much, and potentially churning because of it.
Yeah, and I'm again speaking in broad swaths. So there could be someone listening to this and be like, "What? That is totally false. Our customers are in marketing and they're scrambled. Like, we cannot put new features out enough." Again, I'm coming from the perspective of enterprise software, so we're talking to CFOs, we're talking to CROs, COOs, heads of engineering. They want to see it, but also the closer you are to actually impacting a company's revenue, their ability to recognize revenue, their ability to take in payments, any type of tool, that's where the customers are really being very, very cautious about their adoption. Also, the larger the company that you're selling into, if you're selling into a smaller business, maybe they can absorb the risk in different ways. If you're selling into private companies versus public companies, maybe they can absorb the risk in different ways. But where I'm seeing a lot of the pause is largely public companies, enterprises, where the software itself is really material and impacting parts of the business that could have a material impact on revenue, could have a material impact on very highly sensitive data or customer data. And frankly, thinking back to the early days of SaaS is the exact same adoption pattern, where it was those functions that were a bit more connected to the back office side of the business that were much more uneasy about having their data and systems sitting in a data center outside of the company than salespeople who were like, I don't care. I'll just, access it on my mobile phone and I won't involve IT and no harm, no foul. And so it's sort of somewhat of a parallel situation here. But I do think if you're selling enterprise software to really large public companies, that's where you're going to be met with some customer resistance and some policies that you're going to have to figure out how to work around.
Quick pause. If you're getting value from this episode, I want to ask you a small favor. Take 30 seconds right now, open up the app you're listening to this on, and give us a 5-star rating. It sounds small, but it's the single biggest thing you can do to help us get conversations like this in front of more revenue leaders. While you're there, hit follow so you never miss an episode. Okay, let's get back into it.
What are some of the AI features or just features in general that you've seen in your data and the data sets you have available to you really succeed? What's working right now?
Yeah, so I will say, one thing that is really important that is not thought about as much is the time to value for the software itself. Even though software as a service is not the heavy physical media software of years ago from an implementation perspective, it still can take a long time to implement enterprise software, even SaaS software, depending on what your data environment looks like at the customer. And so I think one really interesting thing and something I've been very excited about is seeing how companies are using AI to help reduce time to value, meaning they're able to get using the software and get productive on the software more quickly because they're spending less time pulling data sets together, architecting the data within the environment, and actually internalizing the data within the system and getting productive on it. So maybe a little bit less sexy feature and not something that people talk about a lot, but being able to shorten an implementation time and being able to help the customer get successful really quickly on software. Sometimes during implementations, you run into these situations where if the system was meant to change processes, because it's taking so long, the customer's like, no, let's just hold on to the processes we have. You can speed things up and be more prescriptive in implementation and more self-service using AI. I think that can be really exciting. MCP server is another thing that we're seeing, just the ability for customers, because it is so available to write their own and create their own agents to do things. And customers really want to do that. The more you can make your data and basically the benefits of your tool easily discoverable to that customer, the more exciting that's going to be for the customer and the more longevity that's going to provide to your system. And then, of course, the third thing is the sort of the co-pilot type model, which is making the ability to get more out of the system, do different, speed up processes, basically, make tasks less clicking, more easy, natural user interface to get things done. We're all getting really used to how easy it is to write system commands and things for ChatGPT, which you used to have to be a coder to get to build things like this. You can now use natural language. And so being able to do that within tools, show me this, pull up all of these invoices, show me these receipts, give me these customers, just being able to talk to your tools like you would talk to an assistant is, I think, also a really something we're all expecting, and I think is really exciting because it's truly bringing the power of a lot of these software tools into the hands of the people that are, becoming more effective because of it.
Mm-hmm. I visualize this as us one day just being like Iron Man, just if you're listening to this in audio, you can't see, but my hands are moving in the way that Iron Man does when he's talking to his computer and building his robot models and stuff. It's
Yeah,
yes,
I know. That's a great analogy. And I mean, that felt so futuristic at the time, those early Iron Man movies. But when you think of it, it's like, yeah,
it's kind of like AI.
Yeah, I've had moments in my own life recently where using some of these tools where I feel like I'm, a superhero in a way. And that's what we all want to feel. And so how do you create that kind of delight within a customer in a way that they're like, wow, I would pay for this.
Hmm.
This is so much more
Yeah.
valuable. And that's, again, the slippery slope. So I think that the frustration comes from, we can do all of these great things, but our underlying costs for delivering that, we don't have great predictability into understanding that. We don't have great understanding into how the customer is willing to pay for some of that incredible capability. And that's where I really believe that getting from that extractive to the sustainable model means that you've really got to think first of what is the outcome that's going to delight the customer? How do you guarantee that outcome? How do you create a way of actually tracking that outcome has been achieved? And that is where you see people talking about monetization going in the future. I think there's going to be an intermediate step, which is very much focused on usage before we get to true performant outcome type models, in part because we don't know what those outcomes are yet for a lot of these tools, because we are experimenting so much. Efficiency of what? How valuable is that? Does everyone experience that uniformly? How do you create a pricing model based on that? Those are all the things that people are asking right now.
And what do you think of the sayings like, if somebody asked Ford, or Ford had asked customers what they wanted at that time, they would said a faster horse, and said he brought them the car. So like, I totally agree with the concept of talking to your customers and making sure that you are having that feedback loop with your audience and product and marketing and sales and everything. But what about, the stuff that people don't know that they don't want know that they want yet?
Yeah, that's a really great, I think a great point. And I think that's what's exciting about right now is it is really possible. And some of the tools I'm interacting with today, like I didn't know I wanted the ability to take my image and put it on the body of a mountain climber and use that in a profile picture, but I
Yeah.
could do that and it was really cool, but I don't know if I'd pay for that.
Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit of like, when it comes to software and software capabilities, there always should be visionaries that are out there thinking about what's possible that people can't even conceptualize yet, that we know is absolutely going to be where the market's going. And I'm so glad that there are visionaries that do that, because I think in many ways our lives are better for the people that are always out there, right? And thinking in that way. But I would say then there's also the reality of how do you get the customer from here to there. And I think for many of us, we are not starting from a blank sheet of paper. We are starting with a customer base that has expectations for what we do and the value that we provide, and we want to take them on the journey with us. And taking them on that journey, there aren't too many companies that have reinvented themselves and been able to bring the entire customer base along with them. And so you have to be willing to kind of make that, if I'm going to build a horse instead of a car instead of a horse-drawn carriage, do I have the ability to say goodbye to everyone who just wants a horse-drawn carriage? And in the case of Henry Ford, he was starting something completely brand new from scratch, and so didn't have that maybe legacy. And so I am working with a lot of companies that do have some of that legacy already and are trying to figure out how do we bridge that chasm. And there are companies, by the way, who have said goodbye to whole customer bases. And Adobe back in the day is famously brought up as an example. When they shifted to their Creative Cloud business model, there were lots of people that said, well, you can say goodbye to me. And they knew that was going to be the case. And they made a calculation. And Microsoft has done this many times over the years as well, that they were going to have to take a short-term hit of customers because they truly believe that this was the next place to go. And so some companies, particularly larger ones, will have that ability to maybe be more visionary and to be willing to lose some customers along in the journey if that's what it takes. And some won't have that license to do that.
So when a company's ready to take this step and iterate on their pricing model and their packaging and everything, what's the right process for them? Like, who should be in the room? How should you avoid analysis paralysis?
Yeah, so we're seeing, it used to be back in the day when I would talk to pricing teams, they'd largely be sitting in product. Product would come up with a schema. They maybe share it with the CRO. They maybe share it with the CFO. And as long as everybody felt okay with it, they'd roll it out. And it used to be a much less frequent iteration. So I remember companies setting new pricing every 6 years or something along those lines. That time window has compressed. And as that time window has compressed, I've seen more and more of that responsibility sitting within the finance organization. That's the team that's doing the modeling, that's thinking about the business. And they're obviously taking feedback in from product. They're taking feedback in from sales and revenue, the people that are out there, talking with customers every day. But they are the ones that sort of own the model and the business model for the business. So you still have people in growth or monetization roles, but they're oftentimes sitting within the office of the CFO, taking input from these other parts of the business, but they are ones that are accountable for the operating model typically. And so that's where those decisions are happening. Having that ability to iterate and move much more quickly is something that's important. The space that I'm in, we run into a lot of companies that have built flexibility by creating SKUs in the product catalog. And what that means is every time they wanted to do a 1 month, this 1 month for product A, or usage for product B, or usage for product A, or 6 month for product A, they just created a new SKU. And what that turns into is this incredibly bloated product catalog, which actually slows down your selling time. It creates a lot of inefficiency in the business. And we have found that companies that have a much more managed product catalog and a shorter long tail of product catalog typically grow faster than those that don't. It varies by software segment. But managing your product catalog is really important, and having the flexibility to monetize and change your monetization approach without having to create a new SKU in your product catalog is positively associated with growth. So I would say from an operational perspective, again, the finance team needs to be involved, but you need to have the capability as well to do at least hybrid. So some sort of a platform fee plus a usage fee. Maybe down the road, you're doing an outcome-based fee, tiering models, et cetera. But build a system where you can have all of that flexibility without creating a hugely bloated product catalog would be what I would advise.
Yeah, and you do spend a lot of time with companies that have a foot in both worlds, right? The recurring revenue and the traditional one-time transaction side. So what makes managing those hybrid models so hard, and the specific operational challenges?
I think that the hybrid models are hard from an operational perspective because of the fact that you need to have the ability to track usage. So a hybrid model typically involves something that's more stable, like a platform fee. That's not super hard to operationalize. I mean, relatively speaking, you have, and there's usually some sort of static number. A customer might estimate it. Let's say it's seats. Oh, I need 100 seats of the software. Great. Here's 100 seats. You're going to sign a 1-year contract. Your price is this. We'll talk at the end of the year and figure out how many seats you want. That is fairly simple from an operational perspective to do. Where it gets harder is where you have a seat model plus something that is more dynamic than that, like usage. If your seat count is dynamic, which it usually isn't, the whole point of a platform model is usually to be more predictable. It can be operationally more challenging if you're like turning in seats, or maybe you have a seat of one tier, you want to mix and match that with a seat of another tier. That can get complex, but in general, once you start adding usage, that's where things get a little bit more complicated. Why does it get more complicated? Well, you have to have a system that's actually metering the usage. Then you need to have a rating system. So a rating system takes the usage in, so 3 hours, and then it matches that 3 hours with a rate. What is that rate for product A for 3 hours? The rate for this customer is X. And then you need to have the ability to track that over time, and in some scalable way, be able to present that usage back to the customer, to be able to generate an invoice on that usage, to be able to recognize revenue based on that usage. And it has to be auditable and adhere with all the compliance rules, et cetera, et cetera. So it gets more complex when you get the more flexible that you get, not only because you have to meter and rate things and they happen, it could be like down to the minute or the millisecond. If you think of cloud software, that the amount of rating that happens there in these like telco grade systems is quite complex. But even more than that, you have to present that back to the customer and they have to trust it. Because if they don't trust it, they're not going to pay you for it. And you have to generate a bill, which isn't, you don't want to have something super complex for the customer. You've got to summarize it. So all of those things sound like we've all gotten bills from cell phones or utility companies, et cetera, et cetera. It feels maybe simple when you see that, but there's a lot of complexity behind the scenes, a lot of systems complexity and operational complexity that makes that happen. And if you're a CFO, you're all about forecasting the business. What's my next quarter going to look like? My next quarter. So you're using all of that information as well to predict what's going to happen. The seats are really predictable. The usage and the outcomes are not, especially if you're just starting to get involved with that. So that also is, depending on the ratio of predictable to unpredictable, it can cause you some anxiety as a financial leader because it makes it much harder for you to forecast your business.
So do you recommend people, to try to not do that hybrid model if they can, or stick to just purely recurring? Oh, yeah. Okay.
Look, if nobody's demanding that you do it, sure. I suppose you could sell seats in perpetuity, and depending on what you're doing, there are still companies out there selling perpetual license software. They're doing just fine. Their customers don't want any different. I'm assuming that the listeners of this podcast are looking for sources of growth. And at some point in time, the amount of people that want to use that are using your tool will either totally stabilize or even decrease. We all know that one of the big plays with AI inside organizations is efficiency. And so the teams are saying that people will need less seats of any given software because of AI. And so if you are only doing a platform fee, you are going to have limited growth. And so the hybrid model, even though it's hard, I don't see, you should still have an approach for that, especially if you are tapped out. If you know that seat model is tapped out, what I would say companies should not do is say, oh, seat model tapped out, I'm now full on the gas in usage. Is not a good idea to do only usage. And in fact, again, data from our system shows that the sweet spot is somewhere between 1 to 25% of overall revenues should be associated with usage in a hybrid model. If you get less or more than that, you start to see growth decrease. So you need to have some predictability in the model, not just for the customer, but also for you. But having that usage is absolutely what's going to allow you to see more growth. So it's hard. I wouldn't do it without putting in, for example, a metering and rating system. You aren't going to be able to keep up with it using spreadsheets for very long, which some companies do try to do in the early days, but you got to think ahead. But it's certainly, there's some challenges associated with it for sure.
What are some other do's and don'ts of having that hybrid model, either for people who think that their company might go in that direction, or they're already using that kind of model?
Yeah, I would say, it's fairly simple. So again, you want to have a mix of predictability and you want to have the ability to align. I always say this in terms of the breadth and depth of usage. So if the breadth of usage is the platform fee, the depth of usage is the use intensity. How much is the customer really getting out of it? And at the end of the day, why do we do any of this? Going back to that symbiosis topic at the very beginning, so where are you creating value and what is the customer think is a fair value exchange? And that fair value exchange, again, is that breadth and depth. Some customers might roll things out to users and they're not heavily using it. Others might roll things out to users and they're really heavily using it. Which one is getting more value? Well, if you use usage as a proxy, you could say the customer that's using it more is more likely getting more value and therefore they should pay more. Now, the question becomes how much more? This is where you have to be careful with being too extractive. If you just say you're getting more value, you have X amount of usage, I'm just going to assume that because you're using 10x more than this customer, you're going to pay 10x more. That model won't work for customers because that's unpredictable for them. That is very extractive. So you have to come up with an approach that measures both of those things, that has pricing based on both of those things, but that the customer sees is fair. And so that means that that usage piece, again, I gave that between 1 and 25% of revenue. Think of that from the customer perspective. That means a very small portion of what they pay you should be associated with usage. It shouldn't be most of what they pay you, because what happens if that usage model, which is unpredictable, gets to a certain point? The customer should come to you, or you should proactively go to them and say, I see your usage is really high. It's higher than you expected it would be. That's awesome. Let's move you up to a higher platform tier than you had before. Think of our cell phone plan from years ago. I don't know if you remember, but back a while ago, messaging, SMS was not part of the core bill. I don't know if you
I do
had a
remember.
and but you would pay, because at the very early days, people didn't know how many text messages they were going to sell. Like, imagine if you were paying per SMS today. Maybe some people are, but like that would be insane. It's now just part of the base platform fee. But so over time, that usage fee serves a really good need for something that's new, aka AI as an example. But at some point in time, if that feature becomes so widely adopted that people just see like, gosh, this is core to the functionality of the phone itself. If I couldn't send SMSs, or if I had to think every time I send an SMS with like a picture of a cat or whatever on it, that's like, oh, it's another 10 cents. That would be something I would not want to have to try to do the calculation in my head. It's the same thing for customers and enterprise software. So just being, I think putting yourself in your customer's shoes is the number one thing that anyone can do in these times. And the easiest way of doing that is having a conversation with them. If that's not possible, the next easiest way is thinking about things that you're buying or consuming today. Because chances are we're all interacting with these, AI services, et cetera. Would I be happy if the thing I pay $20 a month for suddenly became $2,000 because that's how much value they figured out I'm getting out of it? I probably would not make that leap, right? But I might make the leap to 40, or I might make the leap to 100, or I might and so you got to kind of go through the mental math yourself as a human. Pricing and packaging, it's all psychology. It's all behavioral. I think that's why I've been interested in this area for such a long time, because honestly, like pricing, I'm sure some of my peers that do pricing research would be like, what are you talking about? Like, no, the reason I like it is because it comes down to psychology and like what makes us human, and the relationship that you are entering into with any type of subscription or recurring services, just like any relationship that you sometimes we'll talk about friends who are like, oh, that's more of a transactional friend. It's the same thing. Like, you don't want to be that transactional friend if you're a provider. Well, okay, what makes you something that people don't want to just have one experience with and then move on? How do you actually become part of their inner circle? What do you need to do to be trustworthy? You have to listen. You have to provide value back. All of those things are what make these models enduring. And so I think getting back to the basics of that is what a successful company today needs to do.
You've talked before about recurring revenue businesses following a maturity curve. Can you walk us through what that looks like and where companies get stuck?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a maturity model that I've worked with hundreds of companies on, and I'm actually in the process of building a trust dynamic into that and sort of dusting that off and working with companies as they try to build AI models. But it's 5 different stages, and that's pretty much any maturity model that you're going to see is going to have 4 or 5 stages. The very first stage of the maturity model is launch. And that is a very exciting stage where you're all about acquisition. So think about any new business. The very first thing that they need to try to do is to get people to sign up. And so they have all kinds of $20 per month pricing, $5.99 per user pricing, like really like hooks out there to get people, like, we just want people in to try this thing out, all kinds of promotions. Same thing, new coffee shop opens up, like here's a card, like they do whatever they can to try to get people to come in and make it exciting. And that part is where I spend a lot of time with companies, making sure that they do actually know who their customer is that they're going to get value out of. I mean, there's a lot within the launch stage that you need to do to make sure you're setting yourself up for success in the future. But frankly, that's where you can be very have a lot of experiments. When you start to shift to the next stage of maturity, as you might expect, that's when companies start to think about, oh, we have people trying the thing and then they're not coming back, they're leaving. Or we don't have enough, we've signed up everybody that we can from a low-hanging fruit perspective. We need to figure out, how we get new people to sign up, because our cost to serve is outpacing the revenue that we're getting in. We either need to raise prices on the existing customers that we have, or we need to have a new tier of offering. So what we see happening in the next stage is companies really focusing on expanding that spectrum of companies, of individuals or companies, depending on whether we're talking B2C or B2B, that they can bring in, and starting to think about retention. They're not thinking about expansion plays at all, but they're really focused on how can we retain the customers that we have. And sometimes that might be, who are we good for? Like really having a hard look at, for those companies who are staying or those individuals, why? Why are they signing up year after year? What kind of experience are we creating? What kind of moat are we creating? What kind of stickiness are we creating to make people renew and stay around? And that's when we start to think people experiment with things like pause and resume and downsells. So I mentioned that earlier on. The dark side of this is one thing we can start to see companies do, which is terrible, is make it hard for people to figure out how to cancel. It's like they lock the door on them once they get in. Really bad. Don't do that. This is people off. I mean, we can all think of things that we like, okay, I'm not getting value out of this anymore. I want to cancel. And you can't figure out how to cancel it. Or you signed up for something online and you've got to talk to a human being to cancel. Like the worst. So don't do that. But there are things that you can do within that second stage to make sure that you are creating something that people want to stay. So really narrowing down, who are we good for and why? Again, talking to people. You can probably do this with the data within your system if you're a digital product or service as well, and do some behavioral analysis, but also creating streams like the ability to pause and resume a subscription and the ability to downsell. So that's where people might have, maybe they had just a $5.99 a month per user per month or something, or they might start to add on different types of tiers of usage. So like, let's not even talk about per user or per usage fees at this point. Maybe you have a different tier of user fee that you implement. The third stage, and this is where people can start to spin, is your ability to start adding expansion into the mix. So I've brought them in, I've figured out how to get them to stay. Where else can I send them? And you can do that with pricing. You can do that with different features. You can do that with additional services. But this is where companies tend to spin, because this is where experimentation happens. And this is where I'd say a lot of companies are with their AI, which is, how do I expand? I've got customers. I've figured out how to retain them. I want to expand that relationship. Oop, now I have AI. Okay, your bill is 6x. Like, that is not the way to do it. That's what we see companies doing, because they're thinking, oh, I'm making this huge investment. It's, I've seen the demos. They're absolutely incredible what they can do for a customer, but your specific customer might not be ready to do that thing with you yet. So it is hard, but you have to figure out, how do I expand it? Because that's the only way that a recurring revenue business is going to reach the promise of why you probably have that business model to begin with, which is to see that year over year growth rate. So your ability to bring customers in, to retain them, and then expand that relationship is so critical. And then moving beyond, in stage 4 and stage 5, and honestly, I don't know any companies in stage 5. That's sort of like the science fiction Iron Man, Eureka story. Right. I like to always kind of paint this picture of where you could go. But when you can get to stage 4, you actually truly have some growth vectors and offers that people are willing to pay money for. One company that I use as an example of a stage 4 company and their ability to do this, I think sometimes it's easier to talk about things that we might use in our personal life than in our business life, just because we all, like, you probably know this one, or at least something like that, is the New York Times. And what the New York Times were able to do with So I'll use myself as an example. I became a New York Times subscriber during the pandemic because I wanted or might have even been prior to the pandemic, but primarily it was for the news. And then I started to play Wordle, and I got an offer of, why don't you add on games? I thought, why don't I do that? And that is great. And then I was searching for recipes on Google, and lo and behold, I got an offer for a bundle that included everything, including New York Times cooking. And so they have been able to expand their relationship with me from news to games to including now cooking and The Athletic, because now I have the whole thing. And then recently I have started to get offers for the family plan, which I have not bit on yet because I can sell gift articles and things like that to my family when I want to see it. But they have done an incredible job using data, using, all of the different sources of data that they have, behavioral, and to present me with offers at the right time, at the right price that have been compelling. And frankly, they have kept me a subscriber and kept me growing my footprint with them. Other companies have done this with pure price increases. Netflix is a good example of that. We probably have all experienced with streaming services pricing kind of going up and up and up at a predictable tick. The argument is like, look at all this original content that we're creating. Look at all this content that we're pulling in from these other streaming providers, these partnerships. Now we're bringing in live sports, other live events. So that stage 4 company is constantly looking at ways to expand that relationship with the customer, either through new functionality or through increased pricing.
Awesome. I love that model. So I have one final question for you, Amy. Based on all this stuff, what should CROs and revenue leaders be paying attention to right now that you don't think they are?
What is your competitive moat? I think this is one thing that we're spending a lot of time thinking about. I am an operator at a software company, in addition to being someone that advises a lot of companies as well. And so, we know that we're going to be in a situation where there's going to be a lot of new competitors coming on in our space. Our customers are going to be getting calls from people who are looking to displace us. There's going to be a shakeup. And so understanding what your competitive moat is and how to build on that is so important. So maybe your competitive moat is your vertical expertise. Maybe your competitive moat is you're a glue system that sits in between many different systems. Maybe your competitive moat is you have an understanding of the regulatory and compliance environment, and your system of record is one that is very, very trustworthy, that customers rely on for that. And it'd be much harder for them to say vibe code that internally, or for a competitor to build something very quickly that rivals that. Maybe your competitive moat is all the context mapping that you have between different systems. So understanding what that is so important from a CRO perspective. Obviously there's a lot of really interesting, and I'm sure some of your other podcasts cover all of the, cool things that are happening within demand gen, within AI and the use of AI and go to market. I'm by no means an expert on that. I know we're trying a lot of things at Zuora. I'm sure a lot of other companies are trying other things, but there are people out there with platforms that are more versed in that than I am. But absolutely, I think just being able to see how much things like building account plans and doing the research and creating compelling pitches, all like unbelievable how much time we can save using some of these tools. Just like mind blowing. But that means that the bar is in a way a bit higher for us to truly understand our customers. Because I find there's research that I can do online and, what have you, using all the different tools. But it isn't until I actually have a conversation with a real human being that I can understand the nuance of what's going on within that company. So that prep work is much faster, but it does not replace the relationship elements that I think have probably separated some of your most successful people from those that haven't been as successful, things like emotional intelligence. The other thing I will say too is, even in this world where with AI and so much innovation happening from a technology perspective, that real opportunity to look a human in the eye and share a meal or talk at an event, it feels like more important than ever. Our live events that we do and that I attend, people are just so hungry for human interaction and conversation. And when it comes down to it, one of the things I've learned being in the software industry as long as I have is we're not selling ones and zeros. We are not. Nobody wants ones and zeros. We're selling trust. I trust you that this thing that you're selling me is going to solve my problem. And that isn't something that that just happens. Like, there have to be people and reputations and other customers behind that to make that occur. So just remembering those fundamentals, not get blinded with science, which was an old song from years and years ago. But
blinded by science. Yeah, I remember.
I think about that a lot. Like, there's so many, like, people can get almost stressed out by how much is changing. And like, yes, it is. But let's remember, let's not get blinded by science. Like, let's remember there's a human who's making a decision to buy and use your tool, whose job may be on the line if they get it wrong or right. They could be up for a promotion. So they're going to want to know that they can trust you. And the ways that we create trust haven't changed that much in the last several hundred years, I don't think, no matter what's happened on the technology side.
Well, I think that is a great place for us to end it today. Thank you so much, Amy. And where can people find you and the Subscribed Institute?
Yeah, so the easiest place to find me, I guess, these days is LinkedIn. I'm working on a few other things. So maybe by the time you're listening to this, I've got my website and the book is out and all that kind of stuff. But for now, I just say connect with me, LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. And I'm really looking forward to how all of these things unfold. This has been a great conversation to have. Thank you so much for inviting me. And if you've stuck with it all this time, I really would love to talk with you. So please reach out.
Yeah. And real quick, what's the name of the book that's coming out?
I don't know yet. Amy's book.
Oh, Amy's book. Awesome. Okay.
Yeah. I think a lot of things that we talked about as far as monetization models, the maturity framework, trust architecture, that's all part of what I'm putting out. The idea is to give people a framework that they can use as they're working through a lot of the operational complexities, the cultural and process and strategy changes that they might need to make as they're trying to adapt to what's happening out there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Amy. Have a good day.
All right. Okay. Bye now.
Thanks for listening to the episode. If this resonated, please give us a 5-star rating and a follow. It helps us reach more people, and you get our latest and greatest content without having to search for it. And if you're looking for hands-on help in go-to-market strategy and/or RevOps, please reach out to us. We help our clients with everything from annual planning to improving processes in go-to-market, implementing systems to support those processes, and go-to-market AI. We're always happy to offer a free consultation to help you identify the best opportunities to improve your go-to-market engine with or without our help. You can find us at unionsquareconsulting.com, and the info will be in our show notes.